The film begins with a tense war between the royal army and a powerful group of rebels. This conflict was incredibly devastating because the rebel group was the strongest in the region, boasting an army of thousands of elite fighters known as God's soldiers. Among them was one unusual warrior named Yang, a young man with a knack for Kung Fu. He was a gifted fighter, but he had a small, fleshy growth on his head that looked like a horn. This horn wasn't a flaw, though. When it was pressed, it would activate his latent martial arts abilities, changing him into a completely different person. 18 years earlier, Yang was born in a shockingly unconventional way. While most babies come out slowly, he shot out like a missile. Because of his strange birth, he was ostracized from a young age, even by his own father, a high-ranking official who was ashamed to have such a strange child. Fortunately, Yang still had a mother who loved him dearly. One winter day, little Yang was playing in the town square when he happened to see a martial arts show. He was spellbound by the Kung Fu moves on display, but while he was busy watching, a few bullies stole his food. He immediately chased after them, but they just mocked him and laughed at the little horn on his head. They pushed him to the ground, and he fell unconscious. The martial arts expert from the show immediately came over to separate them, but unexpectedly, Yang's dormant strength surged up. He was so powerful that it made the master bounce back. The little boy, who had never learned Kung Fu before, then fell unconscious again. At the same time, a tragic scene was unfolding back home. Yang's mother was caught stealing her husband's money. She did it because he had refused to give her a single penny for their son. As a result, she was tortured and thrown out of the house. From that day on, Yang and his mother lived as vagrants, eking out a living on the streets. Her life was on the line due to the increasingly severe results of the domestic violence she had endured. Before she passed away, she gave her son one last word, urging him to do his best at everything. After her mother died, Yang paid his last respects and then went with a martial arts expert to travel and learn martial arts. Yang had met this martial arts entertainer and expert before his mother died, and his name was Zhao. He revealed that Yang's horn was a gift, a rare gift called the 3 blossoms on the crown that was only possessed by a chosen genius. With it, he could master any martial art just by watching it once. Hearing this, Yang's mother was also overjoyed, and she urged him to take the man's offer to learn Kung Fu with him. Fast forward 10 years, and Yang was a part of the army fighting against the royal troops. It was then that the truth was revealed. Zhao was the legendary supreme general of the rebel military. For the past decade, he had pretended to be an ordinary person to recruit children with the potential to become elite soldiers. During one particular war, his troops were being cornered by enemy attacks. As a last resort, the Grandmaster ordered one of his soldiers to hit Yang's horn. He immediately went into a furious, powerful mode. Though he succeeded in slaughtering the enemy troops, the use of the 3 blossoms on the crown horn had a debilitating side effect. It made Yang faint. Yang was immediately rushed to the treatment tent, where he was attended to by a healer named Master Dong. Master Dong was taken aback by Yang's condition, which he considered serious. He suggested that Yang stop going into battle. However, this was the exact opposite of what Zhao had said. The Grandmaster believed that if Yang fought often, his strength would only increase, especially when he used his sacred power. But Master Dong disagreed, saying it would only endanger Yang's life. He instead suggested that Yang learn martial arts from the Chen family, a family known for their specialty in martial arts, to maximize the horn's power and the inner strength it gave him. At the same time, Zhao overheard the conversation and, of course, felt that Master Dong was trying to steal Yang from him. They exchanged blows until, to the Grandmaster's surprise, the healer proved that he was a master of Chen-style Kung Fu himself. He defeated the general with a shocking ease. That night, the troops rested before continuing the war, but suddenly the royal army attacked without a moment's notice. Yang immediately left his tent to save his friends. To his shock, he saw Master Dong lying on the ground, an arrow sticking out of his back. Before he died, the master advised Yang to seek out a Kung Fu expert named Grandmaster Chen from the Chen family. If he didn't, he would eventually die because he couldn't control his horn. Not long after, all the troops were slaughtered by the royal army. Luckily, Yang was able to save himself from the massacre, and without a second thought, he immediately set off to find Grandmaster Chen. After climbing mountains and passing through valleys, he finally managed to find the location. When he arrived, Yang saw a strange sight. A man was meditating in a tree, but completely upside down. He asked the villagers for Grandmaster Chen's address, but they coldly told him that Chen-style Kung Fu was not taught to outsiders. As Yang stood there, he was hit by a carriage. Completely worried, a woman on a mechanical carriage asked if he was okay. This woman was Yun Yang, the Grandmaster's biological daughter. She was seen with her fiancé, Fang. We then cut to Yun Yang's two older brothers who were discussing Fang. They thought he was the smartest guy in the village, a real brainiac who was smart as a whip and a master of all things mechanical. After all, he had studied abroad and was able to create his own car engine from scratch. But even with all his smarts, the villagers just couldn't get on board with him because he was too obsessed with Western culture. Even Yun Yang's brother had a bone to pick with him. One night, the village held a meeting at the village hall to talk about a proposed railway that would connect them to other villages. The person who proposed the plan was, of course, Fang. When the residents gathered, he immediately presented his construction plans, but they weren't having any of it. They objected to his plan because the railway would need a huge plot of land that might displace residents' homes or farms. Hearing their objections, Fang tried to convince them by showing off his electric lights, but it backfired pretty quickly. The lights began short-circuiting, causing the people there to panic. They just up and left right then and there. Some of them even talked smack about him, laughing at how he had gone to school abroad just to fail at making a light. The next day, Yun Yang was doing her daily routine of mixing herbal medicine when Yang came up to her. She thought he was there because he was sick after Fang's car hit him a few days ago, so she tried to give him money for medical expenses. But Yang told her he was there to learn Kungfu from her father. Yun Yang told him that her father's skill was only taught to the people of the village. But because Yang wouldn't take no for an answer, she lied to him and told him her father was behind the mountain. She just wanted to get rid of him. A few moments later, Yang returned to Yun Yang's house, a feeling of deep disappointment washing over him after being sent on a wild goose chase. Yun Yang was completely surprised by how quickly he had gotten back. It usually takes someone 3 whole days to reach the mountain and return. He kept asking her where Grandmaster Chen was, but she was in no mood to talk and tried to leave. He wouldn't take no for an answer, and a fight broke out between them. Thanks to her mastery of Chen-style martial arts, she managed to throw him from the top floor of the building, and he fell completely out cold. Even so, she couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Not long after, Yang woke up to find his body hanging upside down. Right in front of him was a man he didn't know, a laborer and healer named Lung. He had deliberately hung him upside down to get his blood flowing again. After being treated, Yang asked Lung to teach him Chen-style Kung Fu. But unfortunately, Lung was just a laborer and couldn't do Kung Fu. But to Yang's surprise, Lung actually knew about the 3 blossoms on the crown. He advised him to find a doctor because his horn was getting worse and his life was in danger. Later that night, Fang was seen contemplating his failure, feeling down in the dumps. Yun Yang was with him, playing some music. Fang confessed that he was incredibly upset and sad about the villagers' rejection of his railway plan, even though he had promised the governor to complete the construction in just 10 days. Hearing this, Yun Yang offered him a solution: marriage. She told him that if he married her, her influential family would help him, and getting permission to build the railway would be a breeze. But Fang refused. He had gone all the way to school abroad to become an engineer, and he wasn't about to be looked down on by Yun Yang's brothers. The next day, Yun Yang went to the post office, intending to send a letter to Fang. She was afraid that he would leave because their engagement had been on the table for a while, and she was getting worried. But all of a sudden, she was thrown into a panic because Yang came out of nowhere again, asking to be taught Chen-style Kung Fu. Yun Yang, who was at the end of her rope, immediately challenged him to a duel right there. But this time, she used the graceful, gentle, but deadly moves taught by her father. At the same time, Fang was being given a stern talking to by the governor because he had completely failed to persuade the villagers to allow the railway construction, despite the fact that he had spent a lot of fortune to pay for the expenses. Fang was not about to give up. He had already asked for help from an English railway consultant named Claire, who was going to help him get the ball rolling. However, the governor doubted that the presence of a foreigner would help the process. Hearing this, Fang did his best to reassure him. Fang and Claire had prepared a giant tank with the best machine at the time. Their plan was simple. They would use the object to forcibly evict the village. The next day, Yang sat in the market, looking lost in thought. Suddenly, he remembered his mother's message before she died. He must always do his best in anything. Thanks to his late mother's advice, Yang's spirits were lifted, and he decided to go back into the village. To go under the radar, he entered through the gate while covering himself with a straw roof. But every single resident there, even the children, tried to trip him up with their own secret martial arts moves. After a good drubbing from the kids, Yang still had to wrestle with the other villagers, but he failed to beat them. The next day, Yang started mimicking all the moves of the villagers, from Yun Yang's to the children's. As it was revealed earlier, he had the uncanny ability to learn Kung Fu just by seeing the movements once. He then asked Leung for advice on how he could get back in, and the old man advised him to simply imitate every one of his opponent's movements. Finally, Yang tried to enter the village again, but this time, he had to face a formidable tofu seller who challenged him to a duel. If Yang could break the tofu in his hand, he could enter the village. Without a second thought, Yang went for it. He found out the hard way that the tofu seller was tough as nails, and he was completely out of his league. But as he fell, he had a light bulb moment. He remembered Leung's advice to imitate all of his opponent's movements. He immediately tried this new method, and it worked like a charm. He managed to give the tofu seller a run for his money. But even though he won, Yang remained humble and even apologized to the man for dropping his tofu. After that, Yang ran all over the village, and then he climbed a tower, shouting his thanks to Leung for his help. But not long after, he felt dizzy and fell unconscious. He had absorbed too many kung fu moves, and his body couldn't handle the strain. While Yang was out cold, the village was suddenly attacked by Fang and his men, who wanted to evict the residents with their sophisticated tank, which the locals saw as a monster. After reading the governor's decree, Fang and Claire began demolishing people's houses without any mercy. Seeing this, Yun Yang was deeply disappointed with her fiancé, who had the heart to evict his own village. She begged Fang to stop the eviction, and Fang, who still had a soft spot for her, was finally forced to back down. After they left, Yun Yang met with her brother to figure out a way for the residents to live in peace. But the village officials had already given up, and the only person who could solve this problem was Grandmaster Chen, their own father. However, the next day, Fang and the foreigners came back to force the residents to work for them. The villagers were ordered to build the rails and refuel the tanks, all under the watchful eye of arrogant foreign soldiers who looked down on them. On the other hand, Claire was absolutely livid with Fang. She had just figured out that her partner's special relationship with Yun Yang was putting a wrench in the works of their plan. At the same time, Yang finally came to after his fainting spell. Once again, it was Leung who had saved his life. Leung told him that the village was in complete chaos because of the foreign soldiers who had come to build a railway and start their occupation. Hearing this, Yang felt a wave of fear wash over him. He hadn't had time to learn a thing about the Chen family's kung fu, but Leung, feeling sorry for him, came up with a strategy to stop Fang and his crew. That night, Claire was seen preparing to go back to her country, convinced that Fang cared more about Yun Yang than their deal. Fang, however, tried to stop her, telling her he was in love with her and that their partnership was the most important thing. Unbeknownst to them, Yun Yang was watching them from the rooftop. When they were in the middle of their business, she came in and stopped them both, her face a mask of deep disappointment. While they were busy staring her down, she secretly swiped the tank manual. The next day, Yun Yang met up with the postman, clutching the tank usage book that was full of instructions written in English. She asked the postman to translate the contents for her. Meanwhile, Yang had just finished observing Fang's tank and was drawing a detailed sketch of the engine so that Leung could get a better picture of it. After that, Leung laid out the next part of their plan, and without wasting any time, Yang snuck into the tank to execute the plan. But he was immediately caught by a couple of the foreign soldiers. Without a second thought, Yang used his kung fu moves and made mincemeat of them all. But just as he was celebrating, a big soldier came and beat him. Yang's hits weren't affecting him at all, and he was cornered. But then Yun Yang showed up, coming to his rescue just in the nick of time. They then worked together to stop the tank engine, using the machine manual that the postman had translated. But one of the foreign soldiers who was still alive pressed the emergency alarm, and now everyone was hot on the trail of Yang and Yun Yang. As Yang and Yun Yang were both trying to stop the tank's engine, Fang and Claire suddenly burst in to stop them. Fang looked Yun Yang dead in the eye and said that if she stopped the engine, she would become his enemy. But the woman was not about to take that jab lying down. She immediately moved to destroy the engine, and as a result, the tank exploded. Due to the tank's explosion, many casualties fell, especially the foreign soldiers who were trapped inside. Claire was seen dying, her stomach pierced by a piece of metal. As she was holding back the pain, she looked at Fang and finally breathed her last. Witnessing all that, Fang vowed he would finish the project and avenge her death. On the other hand, Yang and Yunyang managed to make a clean getaway. They went to the village hall to announce that the giant tank had been destroyed. Everyone in the village cheered them on as heroes, but Yang didn't want any of the praise. His only goal was to learn Kung Fu from Grandmaster Chen. Just then, Lung appeared with a completely different look. To everyone's surprise, Lung turned out to be the real Grandmaster Chen. All this time, he had disguised himself as an ordinary laborer to calm his spirit while secretly teaching his Kung Fu to Yang, which meant that Yang had already mastered some of the moves. After explaining everything, Grandmaster Chen told the villagers to get ready for war, because he was sure Fang and his partners would definitely come back for revenge. The next day, every villager grabbed a weapon and got ready in their respective positions. Meanwhile, Grandmaster Chen acted as their general, watching everything from the top of the tower. Before the war began, he urged the villagers not to kill the enemy, because his only goal was to drive them out and warn them. It wasn't long before Fang came back to the village with a fully armed army. They were completely confused because the village was so quiet. But then, all of a sudden, the mothers of the village started attacking them with watermelons and other fruits. The soldiers were completely overwhelmed by the attack of flying fruit, which turned out to be anything but harmless. The villagers had turned their produce into lethal weapons, and the soldiers' bones were breaking like twigs. With great difficulty, Fang rallied his troops to fight back. After a brief scuffle, Fang ordered the villagers to hand over Yang and Yunyang. Yunyang, who was not about to stand idly by, went on the offensive with her Kung Fu moves to take down Fang. Not long after, Yang came to her aid, but then he was suddenly shot and he fell down, out cold. Seeing his apprentice fall, Grandmaster Chen was livid. He finally intervened, taking down all the enemy troops with just his bare hands. He easily defeated hundreds of soldiers, making them look like amateurs. He then slammed Fang to the ground and drove the rest of his troops away. After successfully driving the enemy from the village, a new problem arose. According to the Chen family's ancient teachings, Yang was to be sentenced to death because he had mastered their Kung Fu, which should never be taught to outsiders. But there was one way to get him out of this jam. By marrying Yang to Yunyang, he could become a resident of the village. Hearing this, Yunyang was silent, remembering all the time she had spent with Yang. She realized that she had actually fallen in love with him. Meanwhile, Fang was thrown in jail by the governor because he was no longer useful. A few days later, the entire village celebrated the wedding of Yang and Yunyang. But in the final moments of the film, there was a cliffhanger. Two mysterious warriors were preparing to break into the village. At the same time, the foreign soldiers were also gearing up to get their revenge on Grandmaster Chen and all his followers. The film kicks off with Prince Dun, a Chinese independence fighter, looking up at a magnificent flying object in the sky. This sequel to the first film, Tai Chi Zero, finds a portion of the Ming dynasty under the thumb of British colonialists. To stand a fighting chance, Prince Dun needed to beef up his troops by developing more modern and sophisticated weapons. Meanwhile, back in the village, the locals were getting their party on to celebrate the marriage of none other than Yang and Yunyang. In the prequel, he had been accepted as her husband so that he could master the Chen family's Kung Fu, which was only taught to villagers and family. But just as they were paying their respects to Grandmaster Chen and the elders, someone suddenly showed up. It turns out the person whom they all thought was an intruder was Zai Yang, the Grandmaster's eldest son and Yunyang's brother. Everyone was happy to see him, as he had been away for a long time. For some reason, the Grandmaster looked less than thrilled. That night, the villagers threw a huge party for Zai Yang's return. The Chen family had a special dinner, and they were all chewing the fat and catching up. But while everyone was chatting happily, Zai Yang's wife, Yunair, didn't say anything at all. The reason? She had been unable to hear or speak since birth. Even so, her husband loved her so much. At the same time, Grandmaster Chen and Yunyang were watching Yang from the rooftop. They were both shocked to see him chow down on 20 portions of food like it was nothing. The Grandmaster told his daughter that she had to sleep with him to get closer to him and help him develop his Kung Fu skills, but she refused. She admitted that she didn't have 100% feelings for the Horned Warrior. Yunyang then changed the subject and asked her father to forgive Zai Yang, but the Grandmaster was absolutely furious because his eldest son had made a major mistake by leaving the village without saying goodbye. Later that night, Yunyang went to their room and laid down the law for her husband. First, she made it crystal clear that she was not ready for a physical relationship, so Yang had to sleep on the floor. Second, she was his kung fu teacher, and he had to do as she said. Meanwhile, Ziyang looked completely confused. He couldn't wrap his head around why his smart and beautiful sister would marry a strange guy like Yang. He then brought up the bronze bell prophecy to his family, but they all looked bewildered, especially his youngest brother, Yuji. Not long after, everyone went to their rooms. Ziyang's behavior made a lot more sense now that he was alone with his wife. It turned out they had ulterior motives that could put the whole Chen family in danger. But just as he was about to talk, Yuji suddenly knocked on the door and asked Ziyang for an explanation about the prophecy. He finally gave in and told his brother that the prophecy was tied to the Chen family's kung fu. It said that teaching the kung fu to outsiders would bring a great disaster to the village. The prophecy was made by a monk who had lived there long ago. One day, he found a student who was an outsider in the Chen family hermitage. He then predicted that the student would use the kung fu for evil. After the incident, the monk decided to leave the village. But before he left, he predicted that the village would be hit by a great disaster if they ever taught their kung fu to outsiders again. After hearing Ziyang's story, Yuji was scared out of her wits. The next day, because of the gossip about the prophecy, all the villagers started giving Yang a wide berth. A few moments later, Ziyang met with him and invited him for a walk, talking as they went. Yang praised Ziyang's greatness and said he wished he had his skills. Ziyang, who looked quite pleased with the praise, immediately started showing off his moves. But he was playing a dirty trick. Not long after, Yuji came with two men and tried to capture Yang, intending to kick him out of the village so that no disaster would strike. Yang, who felt he had done nothing wrong, asked his brother-in-law for help, but Ziyang didn't even give him the time of day. He deliberately pressed on Yang's horn, triggering a huge battle that hurt all the villagers around them. On the other hand, Yang fainted as his strength quickly drained away. He and the residents were all then treated at the village health center. After the shocking incident, Ziyang tried to convince his sister to divorce Yang, but Yunyang refused, saying that the horned warrior had saved her life, so she couldn't just up and leave him. The next day, Grandmaster Chen met with Yang and was happy with his progress. He told him that he was a whole new man compared to when he first came to the village. He then gave his son-in-law some advice. He had to stop focusing on just kung fu and start studying nature, especially the villagers' everyday habits. The Grandmaster explained that the roots of Chen-style kung fu are found in the daily movements of the villagers, including how they harvest corn. At the same time, we're shown the village traitor, Fang, who had just gotten out of prison and was hell-bent on getting revenge on the Chen family for defeating and humiliating him. It turns out he had been in cahoots with Ziyang to destroy the Chen family from within. But even with Ziyang on his side, he still needed help from the bandits who were allied with a British colonial named Duke Fleming. It seemed that Fleming was an old friend of Fang's. He invited him to a cemetery to discuss their problems. Prince Dun had wanted to sentence Fang to death for siding with the colonialists, but Fleming managed to pull some strings and get the sentence discharged. At that moment, Fang also visited the grave of Claire, his ex-lover who died in the prequel, because of Yang and Yunyang. There, Fang expressed his sadness and vowed to get his revenge on the Chen family. But to do that, he needed Fleming's help. Meanwhile, Grandmaster Chen stopped by Yunyang's house to show her a legendary herbal plant. He told her to give it to Ziyang when the time was right. The next day, a huge commotion broke out in the village when a bronze bell began to spin and ring very loudly. All the villagers panicked, thinking it was a sign of a great disaster. They immediately drove Yang away. In the midst of the chaos, Ziyang suddenly appeared like a hero, and with his skills, he managed to stop the bell. The residents were relieved. At the same time, Yunair observed the incident from the roof, witnessing her husband tricking the villagers with the prophecy. The bell wasn't turning on its own. It was deliberately set with Ziyang's invention, a machine that could be activated with a button. Just then, Grandmaster Chen appeared and went right after Yunair. He revealed their whole evil plan, saying that he had suspected from the start that his son and Yunair would make trouble in the village. On the other hand, the elders had their minds made up. They had appointed Ziyang as the new family leader since he had successfully stopped the bronze bell. He had also been given the right to decide whether Yang should be kicked to the curb or stay. But Grandmaster Chen was having none of it. He argued that his eldest son had committed fraud and had evil intentions that could endanger the entire village. He then revealed a letter that proved Zai Yang had conspired with Fang. Zai Yang's face went white as a ghost, but the elders and villagers were still dead set on him being the new leader. Seeing that he had no choice, Grandmaster Chen ordered Yang to duel with Zai Yang to see if he was truly worthy of the position. Without wasting a second, the fight began. With everything he had learned from the village, Yang managed to knock Zai Yang to the brink of losing. In that very moment, everything was revealed. Everyone was immediately shocked when they saw a machine strapped to Zai Yang's body. It turned out he had never mastered any Kung Fu at all. Every single one of his movements was controlled by the machine he had built. When he saw it, the Grandmaster immediately remembered the same incident from the past. When his true intentions were revealed, Zai Yang confessed that he never liked practicing Kung Fu. He said it was useless against invaders who had modern weapons and tools. He had chosen to leave the village and start a machine factory, but unfortunately it was threatened with closure by the government. That's when Fang approached him, promising to help him as long as he became the leader of the Chen family. Now his whole plan had gone up in smoke. As a man in shame, he chose to leave. Yang and Yunyang followed him to the village gate and gave him the legendary herbal plant, just as the Grandmaster had ordered. They knew he could sell the plant to get the supplies he needed for his journey. On the other hand, Yang gave 2 horses to Zai Yang and Yun Er so they wouldn't get exhausted on the road. Seeing their kindness, Zai Yang gave his heartfelt thanks and apologized to them. On the other hand, Fang and his troops broke into the deputy governor's office. He declared himself the governor's envoy and said he was there to arrest the deputy for corruption. After a backroom deal with Fleming, Fang officially became the new deputy governor, replacing the former one. The next day, Zai Yang and Yuner visited their factory in the city, but it was sealed. They had to enter through the back door. Inside was an assembled plane, a war machine equipped with weapons that were considered state-of-the-art at the time. He was admiring his work when, out of nowhere, they were both taken to the new deputy governor, who was none other than Fang. Without beating around the bush, Fang told them that he had arrested them because they had failed to take control of the Chen family village. Zai Yang was furious because Fang hadn't kept his promise to unseal his factory. Fang just grinned, telling that he never had any intention of helping him and had only used him to get a foothold in the village. Now he wanted revenge by exiling Zai Yang and Yun Er to a remote place before he destroyed the village and the entire Chen family. At the same time, Grandmaster Chen was training Yang's spiritual abilities by making him meditate on a tree, upside down. While meditating, Yang had a sudden revelation about why Yun Yang still couldn't accept him as a husband. He finally realized his mistake. He had married Yun Yang only so he could learn the Chen family's Kung Fu, and in his desperation, he had ignored the villagers' suffering. With this realization, he immediately went to the giant tank that Fang had once used to evict the village and took it apart with his bare hands. He completely dismantled the machine piece by piece so his wife could see his sincerity. Seeing that, the residents looked relieved and happy, and Yun Yang was deeply moved because it was clear that Yang truly cared about the village. On the other hand, Fang asked the governor for permission to use a massive cannon as he was hell-bent on destroying the entire Chen family village. The governor was doubtful at first, but Fang managed to manipulate him by calling the villagers rebels who had to be slaughtered. Meanwhile, Zai Yang and Yuner were in exile, and Zai Yang looked incredibly anxious. He knew his village would soon be destroyed by Fang. He asked Yun Er to sell the herbal plants from Grandmaster Chen to fund his new project, the warplane. At the same time, Yang and Yun Yang were growing closer by the day as husband and wife. Since that day, Yun Yang had become more enthusiastic about helping her husband strengthen his Kung Fu. Thanks to his wife's help, Yang was able to use the Kung Fu perfectly. He had finally mastered his power, and as a result, the horn on his head disappeared. A few days later, Fang approached the Chen family village, armed with massive cannons and a horde of soldiers. Without beating around the bush, his troops fired the cannon. The commander of the battalion then ordered the villagers to hand over Grandmaster Chen, Yang, and Yun Yang, who were considered rebels. But to everyone's surprise, the Grandmaster was as cool as a cucumber. He invited his son and daughter-in-law to have breakfast during that chaos. While they were eating, Grandmaster Chen laid out his plan. He would surrender to Fang for the safety of the villagers. But before he surrendered, he gave them a final order. If his plan failed, they had to go to Peking City to meet a Kung Fu expert named Grandmaster Li, who was now an advisor and cook at Prince Dun's palace. After that, the three of them met Fang in front of the village gate. Grandmaster Chen said he would surrender, but he begged Fang to release Yang and Yunyang. But Fang didn't want to hear it and immediately ordered his troops to attack all three of them. Even though they only had Kung Fu and their bare hands, the three warriors managed to take down hundreds of soldiers. Grandmaster Chen was even able to lock down the movements of tons of soldiers using his extraordinary Kung Fu. Feeling humiliated, Fang then deployed his reserve troops to surround Grandmaster Chen, Yang, and Yunyang. Just as the three warriors were busy fighting, Fang secretly grabbed a rifle, ready to finish them off. But then, out of nowhere, everyone was blown away by the sight of Ziyang coming in with his homemade plane, armed to the teeth with weapons. Fang's troops were completely overwhelmed, and Grandmaster Chen seized the opportunity. He told Yang and Yunyang to get on the plane and make a beeline for Peking City to meet with Grandmaster Li. Unfortunately, the plane was running out of fuel, and the only solution was to reduce the load. So Ziyang made the ultimate sacrifice and jumped out with a parachute. Not long after the incident, Fleming came to see Fang, who was completely battered and bruised. He ordered his men to take care of him so that he could finish his revenge plan. Meanwhile, the soldiers managed to capture Grandmaster Chen and Ziyang. They were both thrown into the same cell. There, the Grandmaster apologized to his eldest son and expressed his regret for always forbidding him from learning about machines, admitting that technology could also be used for good. On the other hand, Yang and Yunyang had arrived in the city of Peking. They were shocked to see that their faces were on wanted posters, which meant Fang's lies had spread through the city's gossip. As a result, they tried to avoid crowded places and rushed to find Grandmaster Li, according to the instructions. But to meet the Kung Fu master, they had to give him a special plaque and defeat his best student. Without a second thought, Yang immediately accepted the conditions and the challenge. Even though he had succeeded in defeating the first student, Yang still had to fight several of Grandmaster Li's best students, who had Kung Fu skills that were off the charts. But to everyone's surprise, Yang, who was still young, was able to defeat them all very easily. After the fights, Grandmaster Li finally agreed to meet with Yang and Yunyang. He told them that in the past he had been defeated by Grandmaster Chen 7 times. The two of them then told Grandmaster Li about the situation in the Chen family village and everything that had happened because of Fang. They wanted to ask for his help, but the Kung Fu master didn't want to get his hands dirty, especially since they were both fugitives. Without their knowledge, Prince Dun was in the room and had heard their entire conversation. He then promised to help them as long as Yang could prove he was part of the Chen family. The only way to do that was to defeat Grandmaster Li using the Chen-style Kung Fu. But if he lost, he would be thrown in jail for being an intruder in the palace. Yang happily accepted the challenge. The duel was absolutely epic, but in the middle of the fight, Yang suddenly smelled steamed fish from the kitchen and was tempted to chow down, bringing his focus to an all-time low. But Yang was able to maintain his focus thanks to Yunyang's help. With a single breath, he unleashed the gentle but deadly Kung Fu of the Chen family. After a long, drawn-out duel, Grandmaster Li finally gave in and admitted Yang's greatness. He told Prince Dun that the Kung Fu he used was indeed from the Chen family. Not only that, the prince was so amazed by his movements that from then on, he called the Kung Fu by a new name, Tai Chi. Prince Dun then fulfilled his promise. He helped them get Grandmaster Chen and Ziyang out of prison. Yang and Yunyang then returned to the village and lived happily with the other residents. The prince also drove out the invaders and used an empty land to build the new railroad. But in the final shot of the film, Duke took Fang to a remote place to plan his revenge, ending the film on a cliffhanger.